Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the BA students who are here, our guests, and those who are following us online. Everybody's welcome. My name is Paolo Framshira. I am the president of the Global Policy Institute, think tank associated closely with Beata University. And I also serve as professor of political science and international relations at Beata University, which has nothing to do with what we're going to listen to tonight. I am in awe, when I look at people and talk to people who really understand science and technology and information technology. That's the future, guys. I mean, we depend on you. so I am in awe. I was just watching a program today where a famous economist was talking about economic progress of mankind, and noticed that for thousands of years, humans pretty much did the same thing. No change, no growth, no technology, no nothing. We had to wait until the late 18th century. We started seeing the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, then later on electricity and all the other stuff. And now, sky's the limit. We are now in a new trend where we don't measure growth by potentially going in the future by 2 or 3% a year, maybe a good year, but who knows what? Because artificial intelligence may redesign everything that we know. Probably, at least that's what the lay people like me emphasizing. But without further ado, let me turn it over to the experts, to the professors, my distinguished colleagues here. We set up these programs in cooperation between GPI and the university. We're fortunate to be able to bring to you richer academic experience and great experts like guest tonight, Mr. Tracy, who drove a long way to come to us. But let me turn it over to my colleagues.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of GPI and Bay Atlantic University, I would like to thank Mr. Tracy. As Mr. Paulo said, he drove almost 9 hours to be here all the way from Maine, literally Canada. So we are really humbled and thankful for having him. He have a wealth of knowledge on cyber. He is an expert and a strategist. So I'm quite sure that he will share us his knowledge. It's hard to share it in an hour, but at least he will shed some light on the various emerging trends in IT, comparing the past, the present, and the future. So if you have any questions, write it down. We have a Q&A session after the presentation, so feel free to raise your questions. We can collaborate, discuss. That's what the purpose of this session is all about. That being said, please join me in welcoming Mr. Tracy to the podium. Thank you so much.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to BAU for inviting me to give this talk. I have a certain passion about helping the next generation of technology and cybersecurity professionals develop. That's actually, one of the things. I've been a chief information security officer at a couple of different organizations, and one of the things that I have always done is to have an internship program so that we can help develop the next generation of information security professionals and IT professionals in general. At my last place, I had 11 interns who stayed with the organization. Many of them stayed in my organization in cybersecurity, but others found, passions outside of that and actually stayed with the organization in other positions. So one small piece of advice, you're going to hear a few of them as I speak. If you have the ability to get an internship, take an internship and understand what it is that you enjoy. Because if you enjoy something, like I happen to enjoy security, and it wasn't a big leap or hassle for me to come down, because I have always wanted to go to the National Cryptological Museum. But typically when I come down, it's to see family, and I have my family with me. And my kids really don't have any interest in seeing the Enigma machine and understanding more about Caesar ciphers and the history of cryptology or cryptography. But I was able to do that today. So again, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And as you go through and develop your skills, people will tell you that when you deliver a PowerPoint presentation, you should give about a minute per slide. So I have at least 25 slides. So this is going to come a little fast, but don't worry about it. It's more like an appetizer. This is to help you hopefully become a little bit more curious about the history of IT and computing, because I am going to venture a guess that it's actually going to be more useful than you think. Now, like many of you, I have a little bit more of a non-traditional entrance into technology and IT. My undergrad was actually in political science.
Oh,
There's absolutely hope. I have my undergrad is political science and Spanish. And I ended up going into IT because that was when the kind of the networking and distributed computing pre-internet days or very early internet days was happening. And they needed people who could speak Spanish to try to sell to Spanish countries. Right? So that's kind of how I fell into this. To give you an idea, when I was in college, I had no interest in computer science because my friends who were in computer science were learning how to program in languages like Fortran and COBOL, because that's what they were teaching at the time. Okay. And I'm not that old, but I'm old enough. So we're going to go fairly quickly. Don't worry about it. I want you to get the general sense of the history, because the history is going to tell the future. And if you can predict the future, even slightly closely, you're going to do very well in life. Okay. So we're going to talk briefly about the history of technology and security, what the present state is, what we can expect from the future, and then we'll do a quick summary. So are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, let's buckle up. So history of IT. I cut this off from the 1970s going forward. I could have gone back much further. I could have gone back to the 1930s and 40s. If you go to the National Cryptological Museum, you can actually see mainframes and computers from that time period there. In the 70s, mainframe computers from IBM and the ARPANET, the initial internet, were developed. An operating system, like the Unix operating system, and microcomputers were invented and became mainstream, right? They were kind of more broadly adopted inside of organizations. In the 1980s, they called the PC era, the PC revolution. Had IBM PCs and IBM PC clones, the Microsoft DOS operating system, which eventually gave way to Windows, the Macintosh operating system, that was essentially the 1980s. In the 1990s, end up with Web 1.0, right? The World Wide Web protocols, the Mosaic browser, and then finally at the end of the 90s, the dot-com boom. In the 2000s, or as some people are calling them, the noughties, you have the rise of social media, cloud computing, and then finally the iPhone, kind of a big change in 2007. In the 2010s, the expansion of the Internet of Things, IoT, big data analytics, machine learning, and then mobile application ecosystems. Again, the predecessor to that being the iPhone coming out. And then finally, you see where we are today with kind of AI and quantum computing. Where you're talking about the metaverse and really, really embedded AI and machine learning. So that's kind of a very quick history of the timeline of technology. This is cybersecurity layered on top of that. So after you had a mainframe, a little while later, you had Creeper, which was the first virus written for a mainframe. And then you had the first antivirus, which was Reaper, to get rid of Creeper. And then the invention of Diffie-Hellman keys. And Diffie-Hellman keys were very important because they actually provided the first substrate for security. How do you sign something to make sure that you have non-repudiation? You know that it's valid. Back in these days, in the early days of mainframe computing, your login was your initials. If somebody wanted to write you a message, they would open up a text editor, write the message, and then they would put it in your home directory. There was absolutely zero security. No security. Why? Because everybody who was working on these machines, and there weren't many of them, had to have access into a building, into a facility that gave you access to the actual device. So security wasn't necessarily in the front of anybody's mind because it required physical access. In the 1980s, start to see the ARPANET get hacked, right? Very early network and network topology getting hacked. First commercial antivirus is invented by McAfee, and you see the Morris worm, which is the first self-replicating virus. Morris worm was interesting because it wasn't intended to cause any damage. The idea was that it would go in and it would do a certain function, and then it would check to see if it had already run. If it had already run, it would stop. So there was a logic in the error. There was an error in the logic where it would delete itself after it had gone through that process. But then it would respawn and say, oh, I haven't run, and run again. And that's the way that it replicated. And in the future, we see the same thing happen. So in the 2000s, we see a major shift in encryption capabilities. This shift in encryption capabilities is actually what starts to lay the groundwork for Web 2.0, which is e-commerce. The internet and e-commerce doesn't work without encryption, doesn't work without security, right? If you can go and take somebody's money, nobody's going to do trade with you. You see the Melissa virus, which was very much like the Morris worm combined with another virus that didn't make the list, and I'll explain that in a second, why that's not there, called the Christmas tree virus, which was a self-replicating email virus. One of the first on microcomputers, one of the first self-replicating email viruses. You went in and read it, and once you read it, it would automatically send itself to everybody else in your address book. Melissa functioned exactly the same about 10 years later. Going into the 2000s, you end up with the love bug virus, the code red and SQL slammer worms, where essentially what they did was a quick scan to find a vulnerable host. And if it was vulnerable, it infected it and then continued, right? And we see the first law come into effect, at least in the United States, regarding data privacy and security, which is HIPAA, and then a self-regulation in the credit card industry, PCI DSS, the payment card industry data security standards, which are still in existence today. We move into the 2010s. Has anybody ever heard of Stuxnet? Stuxnet, one of the largest ransomware attacks ever. Yeah, in the entire world. The method of propagation was basically the same as Melissa. It's a worm. They all function fundamentally the same. It was just delivered in a different context. So if there's any thread that you should start to be picking up on right now, that we've seen all of this, and we see this every 10 years. There's a new technology that's adopted. It does not have the appropriate security boundaries, and then it's exploited. And then we do something about it. Another one, which would be great for people to look up and think about, because this one actually happened again 10 years later. The Shamoon virus, or Shamoon attack, that was actually against BP Aramco in Saudi Arabia. Most people don't know about this one. This is like a really, like, if you're into cyber, you know about this. 30,000 machines turned into bricks. Infected. It was a worm, but it was a destructive worm. So most of the time when you're dealing from a cybersecurity perspective, you're dealing with attackers who are trying to have some type of symbiotic relationship with your machine or your environment so that they can generate revenue. In this particular case, this was actually somebody breaking into your house, not really taking anything. They just set it on fire and burned it down. They crippled Saudi Aramco for an extended period of time by destroying their computer systems. As we step through this time period, we also see the introduction of what they call next generation antivirus, which actually is machine learning, right? It learns the behavior on your system and what you should be doing on your system. This is the interesting thing about the crossover between cybersecurity and big data. Cybersecurity has been the largest consumer of big data and machine learning and AI in the IT field outside of the data people themselves. We've been doing this for years. I implemented my first next generation AV product 10 years ago. So that antivirus product sits on top of your computer, looks at the processes that are running, does not look specifically for whether or not something is infected or malicious. Heuristically, it looks at the behavior. As an example, ransomware is always 3 steps. Something is downloaded, probably a dynamic link library, DLL. There's an execution that happens on the machine. There's a call out to a command and control facility. And then there's a key exchange to enable encryption. Next generation AV systems do not look for the heuristic of the bad file. They look for that behavior, and then they block it and mitigate it. And now we have some AI, quote unquote, we'll talk about that, AI-enabled antivirus and security products as well. And finally, we have the WannaCry ransomware, which is, again, probably one of the largest, if not the largest, depending on how you cut the financials, ransomware attacks. But again, essentially, it was just a worm. It was a worm that did certain things, and it was related more to Russia, Ukraine, got outside of Ukraine because of some error in programming logic, and infected everything that was possible to be infected in less than 24 hours. So things continue to move fast. Now we have more advanced threats, more ransomware and vulnerabilities. We're starting to see some AI-powered attacks, and we're starting to see the need to do quantum-resistant cryptography. So that is a very quick history of IT and cybersecurity. Just a couple of things I want you to take away from this. Whenever there is a new technology, there's an opportunity for people to do bad things to it. And because folks who are trying to develop that new technology are focused on just making it work, they often don't focus on the security. Oftentimes because they don't understand how what they're doing can be misused. Okay? And that's where we are today. So does anybody know what the Babel fish is? Raise your hand. No? So back in the 1970s, there was this guy who wrote this book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was a sci-fi book where the planet Earth is destroyed to make way for a new hyperspace bypass. And one Earthling makes it off of the planet Earth. And he can't understand anything that the other aliens are saying, so they put a Babel fish in his ear. This is actually from the book. This is how they describe the Babel fish. It automatically translates anything that anybody is saying in any language. We have this today with AI. This is what AI is doing for us. This is a joke sci-fi book, because the book was actually, the series of books were actually a comedy. This is a joke from 40 years ago, which is now reality in present day. So that's where we are today. Technology cycles, as you just saw, typically go in 20-year cycles because it takes time for people to adopt. And I would argue that right now with AI, we are in what's called a super cycle. And that's compounding technology cycles standing on top of each other to create significant change. We are moving incredibly fast. I was actually just talking to Professor Z before we started. I have never seen a technology trend move this fast in my entire life. Are you familiar with Moore's Law? Right? Moore's Law said the number of transistors that you can fit on a physical piece of silicon will double every 18 months. And we've lived with Moore's Law for 50 years. Well, Moore's Law is dead, but not in the way that you think. It's actually dead because things are moving faster. The speed at which AI is doubling is every 6 months. If you want to be pedantic about it, it's technically 5.7, but we'll call it every 6 months. The speed at which AI agents are changing is every 3 months. I finished this presentation yesterday at noon, sent it off. Yesterday afternoon, 3 o'clock Eastern time, Google came out with an announcement that's going to change the way agents work. At the end of November, Anthropic made an announcement that changed the way that agents work. That's the speed at which we are moving. And if you understand the historical trends, you will be able to, at least in a small amount, predict the future, because everything has already happened several times before. This trend is just compressing. So one of the ways that we could think about this is the adoption curve and how people or organizations or societies adopt specific innovations. So you always have several different groups of adopters. You have the innovators who make stuff up. You have early adopters, then early majority, late adopters, and then laggards. The same thing will happen with the adoption of AI. Again, I would just argue that it's going to be compressed. And if we actually think about this in a much broader context and understanding the history of this, the AI journey didn't start in 2017. A lot of people will point to 2017 as an inflection point with Google's research paper, All You Need Is Attention, introducing the transformer architecture. It's not actually when it started. It actually started in 1956 in Dartmouth. So in the summer of 1956, at Dartmouth, I can't remember if it was actually Dartmouth College or if it was one of that Ivy school that's up there. You know, they had a 10-day summer project to invent AI in 1956. This is actually how long it's taken us to get to this point. So AI, machine learning, everything else has all been interwoven with IT and security as you go over time. This is another way to think about that adoption curve. So this is the adoption of technologies over time to reach what I think the key might be, is it 1 million or 100 million adopters? So as you can see, the telephone took a period of time. PC was much shorter than that. Smartphone, cell phone, in case you're wondering, that's AI. The blue dotted line is AI. And that's why I argue that this is a technology super cycle, because AI is actually standing on all the shoulders of all the other technologies and infrastructures that we already have in place. Here's another way to think about it. Time to 100 million users. Now, granted, this is not adjusted and does not compensate for the amount of people on the planet Earth at a particular given period of time. You know, when the phone first came out, there was probably like 4 billion people on planet Earth. Now there's like 8. Gives you a general understanding of the pace of adoption. So on the right-hand side of this slide is actually ChatGPT that went from 0, this is ChatGPT, I think 3.5, 0 users to 100 million users in 2 months. That's crazy. But that's the speed of change that we are currently experiencing, that you're currently living through, right? But it does not mean that all of the other steps that happen when a technology is being adopted through the mainframe, through the PC, through the World Wide Web, version 1 and 2, mobile cloud, all of the same things that happened to enable those technologies still has to happen with AI, right? So what is AI? Well, this is one of the big struggles that I think we're having right now. If I were to ask somebody to explain what a mainframe is, I'd probably get a reasonable approximation of what a mainframe computer actually is. If I ask 5 people in this room what AI is, I will probably get 5 different answers. And that's partially because AI is not necessarily specifically one thing. Now, for the students in the room who are in the data program, you'll probably understand this a little bit more readily or easily. Artificial intelligence is actually made up of several subfields: machine learning, neural networks, deep learning. There's other concepts that are embedded in that all lead up to this thing that we're currently calling AI. But in many cases, it's not actually AI. I first started learning about really kind of in-depth AI probably about 15 years ago when I was working for a company that did software for banks and non-bank financials. And we acquired a company that did predictive analytics. Predictive analytics is a form of AI. And all they wanted to do was suck up all the data and run algorithms against it to see what the data would tell them. From a security standpoint, that's need to know. That violates all the rules, right? Why do you need that? We don't know. Well, why do you need this data? We don't know. We don't know until we have the data and we ask the data the questions. There's going to be some friction going forward between trying to actually have adaptive artificial intelligence systems that are secure, because one of the fundamental differences in that previous, I just showed you a very, very small 40-year history. It's actually more like 80 years, right? Is that all of those systems, and this is key, the key. If I could give you like one little jewel put in your head today, those historical systems were all deterministic. You put in one input, it goes through a prescribed set of steps, and you get an output that is the same every single time. If you do not get that output, then there's a bug or there's a security vulnerability. That's the way the system is supposed to work. You put in A, you get out B every single time. With an AI system, and more specifically with a generative AI system, if you put in A, you might get a unicorn. And that's a feature. But how do you secure systems that produce unicorns? Nobody has the answer to that question yet. There are lots of smart people working on it and trying to figure it out, but nobody has an answer for that. The difference with what is coming in the future and what we are actually experiencing and actually building today, we are not building deterministic software and systems. We are building adaptive, probabilistic systems, and software. And those things are completely different. Right? So that is where we are today. If you look at where we are today from a security standpoint, this is actually the lifeblood of a security program. This is what is known as a Security Information Event Management System, or a SIM. And you can see on the left-hand side of the slide all of the inputs, your threat intelligence feeds. These are what the bad actors are doing. Your data sources, which are all your logs. Anybody who I heard somebody mention that they were in the forensics, probably the DFIR class. You need your log sources to be able to determine what happened. You need telemetry from your security solutions, whether that be your firewalls or your antivirus systems, your platforms, which are your applications that you're trying to protect, your networks, because in the modern day, one of the things that you have to take for granted is that nobody can do something bad to you unless they use your network. Because unlike that initial version of computing, where somebody had to be physically in a building, in a room, to be able to use that computing resource, now almost every resource is connected to remotely. It's a much different security model. So if you actually go back to the olden days and you start thinking about this, and I won't do the pop quiz, but just because I've lived it for so long, I could tell you port 80 is HTTP, right? Why is there an HTTPS? Because the original protocol for HTTP had no security built into it, right? So all of those reserved ports that are associated with the protocols below 1024 are typically not secure, right? SMTP port 25. Oh, we want to have secure mail. Okay, that's port 581. There was no security in mind when a lot of these protocols were built, because your security was based on being on a $10 million mainframe connected to a wire that only 100 other facilities had connection to. Now, with this, I can connect to pretty much anything in the world, standing here at any time I want. So SIMs in their current state rely heavily on machine learning and automation to be able to detect bad things that happen, alert on them, and then take an action. And that action typically is not doing something to another system. It's typically throwing an alert to an individual or to another system, right? So we start to think about this. This is the SIM approach to this from a data perspective. Is the ELT is extract, load, and transform, right? That replaced ETL. The reason why we replaced ETL, or sorry, ELT was replaced by ETL because it's actually much faster to do the transformation and load it than it is the other way, right? Security is fundamentally a big data problem. At my previous place, we weren't that big, right? We typically did about a terabyte of log data a day, and we didn't have complete coverage. We blocked about 1 billion bad things a month. And like I said, we weren't that big. To give you an idea, Microsoft, I don't know how much log data they process a day, but I can tell you that I know that they block 20 billion bad things a day. Security is fundamentally a data problem, right? So in order to do that, we need to have a better data pipeline. So again, for the data folks in the room, this is going to look really familiar. I put this in here specifically because from a cybersecurity standpoint, we don't often know this, or we don't think about this problem in this particular way. We think about writing our use cases based off of what we see from indicators of compromise, like a laptop is infected and it does something, right? You see an alert in this system and then an alert in this system, and you realize something is bad. In order to make all that orchestration work, you actually need this data pipeline. So if there's anything that I could suggest, you data folks and you cyber folks should probably start talking a little bit more and understanding each other's worlds, because this is going to be a big thing in the future. If we start to think about the amount of data that AI systems are producing, it's geometrically larger than all the data that already exists. Don't forget the AI systems, specifically the generative AI systems, are trained on the corpus of internet data. So that means all the internet data going back to at least the 90s, if not further. They've consumed that, and that is how they actually create their vectors for next token generation. And they are producing more data than has ever been produced. And if you think about it, the growth, it's not geometric growth. If you go back to that hockey stick, it's actually what's referred to as logarithmic growth. So a system today that is twice as good in 6 months, that is twice as good as 6 months, is not 3 times better, it's 8 times better. In the next 16 months, it's 16 times better. In the next 6 months, it's 32 times better. And we're already 700 days into this hockey stick. So data and data problems are going to be something that, from a cyber perspective as well as a data perspective, are going to be things that need to be solved, right? In a pretty significant way. And these are all the use cases that I could come up with for leveraging AI in cybersecurity. Policy management, one of AI's primary use cases. Hey, you want to understand whether or not you can do something based off the policy? Why read the policy? Why not put that policy into a GPT and be able to have people ask questions to it? Great use case. Operations, reporting, scripting for level 1, level 2, incident response automation, very core use cases for AI. Compliance and risk management, third-party risk management, all great use cases. SOC refers to the Security Operations Center. That's where a lot of people actually get their first jobs in cybersecurity, is actually reviewing log and trying to look for those correlations. It's a great job. You'll learn a lot doing it, and your eyes will be numb at the end of every day because all you're doing is staring at a screen, trying to understand how things relate to each other. That's a place where AI can really, really help, right? Research reporting, malware analysis, these are all great uses for AI, but we're not quite there yet. That's because we don't really have a good definition of AI, let alone of AI agents, which are one of the things that are coming as you hear people talking about AI agents and agentic AI. Another little nugget. The thing that will take you furthest in life and in your career will be your ability to think critically. A lot of people are going to come to you, they're going to be trying to sell you something, and they're going to use marketing techniques to try to say, hey, I have this new thing. It's an AI agent. It's going to solve all your problems. Well, let's think critically and break it down. Think about what an AI agent is. If we decompose AI agents as they're currently being marketed, they're actually being sold as 4 different things. One is traditional automation. You have a deterministic system where you have an input, you have logical flows, if A, B, else, or then, should be very comfortable for everybody to understand that. You do something and you end up with an end result that is the same every single time, very predictable. This is what is often referred to as security orchestration automation response, or SOAR. By the way, nobody's really talking about SOAR anymore. That's one of the things from a critical thinking standpoint that you can look at. Whenever the marketing language changes from to the next greatest thing, that's when you know you're being marketed and not necessarily sold something that actually works. The second term that we see a lot is AI automation. And this one's a little bit easier to understand because it's actually the first thing with a little bit of AI mixed in, a little sprinkle. Like maybe it's an email that's sent with some personalization and not just a variable, right? Not just your last name here in brackets, more like a from your LinkedIn profile type of thing. And there's dynamic AI automation that uses a text classifier and decides the path, right? So this is typically a piece of Python script that will actually take a look at what is being presented to it. It'll do a classification on it. It'll say, is it, you can do whatever you want to do. Sentiment analysis, positive or negative, right? Is it good or bad? And then using that, it will leverage tools to actually do the task at hand. An actual AI agent, which I'm not aware of any that are actually in the wild, specifically in the cyber area, that are being used. It actually makes choices for what sequence and tools to be used autonomously. Now, I happen to know that there is one very large vendor who's close. They think that they are 6 months away of human reinforcement learning from being able to have that first autonomous agent. So that's where we are today. Nobody has this, but again, the key here, and what I want you to take away from it, is the critical thinking to be able to step back and say, I'm being told that this is something. What are the attributes of that thing? And does this solution meet those attributes? Because that will be a constant. And that will be a constant that's going to come at you faster and faster and faster, right? As we go through this. Remember, agents are progressing, doubling in capability every 3 months. AI is doubling in capability every 6 months. You need to be able to think critically about where you are and what it actually is that you're being sold. But don't panic. Again, if you're not familiar with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, this is actually Marvin. Marvin was an android in the book. Strongly recommend that you read the book. It actually has the answer to life, the universe, and everything. That's the whole point of the book. AI is going to be very broadly adopted over the next 5 years. You see the adoption slides that I showed before. You're starting to see now the early adopters get on board. I think 37% of enterprises have adopted AI, and more have said that they will adopt shortly. So we're in the early adopter phase, not in the innovator phase, and all of that is going to compress. So whereas that .com, that 1990 cycle, where you saw the .com boom at the end and the adoption of the World Wide Web, where that took 20 years to happen, I'm going to guess that the AI cycle is going to take 7 to 10. It'll be prime time for you all starting your career to hop on that boat and have fun with it. There'll be AI everywhere. There's already, whether you realize it or not, on new cars, there's already AI in new cars. There's AI in your new phones. It's AI robots, humanoid robotics is coming. And guess what? Little known fact. All of those things have little large language models in them. And there will be AI pet rocks. If we go back, way back in the day, there was this thing that happened. It was a fad. I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s. It was a pet rock. And it was literally a rock in a box. And for whatever reason, as you would say in present day, it went viral and everybody bought it. The same thing will happen multiple times with AI. There will be multiple AI pet rocks. Maybe for this crowd, it might be like a, what was it? What were they called? Tamagotchis. You guys remember the Tamagotchis, right? Where you had this little thing that you had to press the buttons to keep it alive and it would cry. That's essentially a pet rock. There's no real purpose or function to it. It's just going to go viral and people will adopt it. There's going to be some job loss. You hear a lot of people talking about job loss. That's absolutely true. It is inevitable. It will actually happen. If we went back and we fleshed out that history slide a little bit more, and I had the information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I could probably show you the transition from when there were typing pools, where literally there were people in very, very large rooms that used to sit at mechanical typewriters and type out memos. And all of those jobs went away as things became digitized. But you know what? There were a ton of new jobs that were created during that digital revolution. So at least twice as many new jobs will be created out of this next AI wave as will be lost because of the efficiencies. We don't currently, there's no such thing as a humanoid robot today. Somebody is going to have to maintain those. Somebody's going to have to program those. Somebody's going to have to test those. There's going to be a whole economy that happens around humanoid robots that actually does not exist today. Heck, I got, and I'll kind of reveal a little bit of my age. I received my first cybersecurity title after being a technologist for a while in 2005. I've technically only been doing this for 20 years. Most of the jobs that I see posted are looking for 10 to 15 years of experience. And you know what? I can tell you honestly, there weren't that many of us 10 or 15 years ago. Right? New jobs. So if you can figure out what's going to happen based on the history, you can take a good path. There's going to be cybersecurity incidents, and probably fairly large ones. And they're going to look like viruses. If you go back and do some of the research on the history that I just showed you, they will look very much like the stuff that we saw in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the noughties. It's all going to look the same because fundamentally, from a cybersecurity perspective, the root cause of these are all essentially the same. But there will be new things that we have never seen before. There was a point in time where the word ransomware didn't exist. There was a point in time when malware didn't exist. Software and hardware, those are relatively new terms. There's going to be new language and new terms that will describe things that are going to happen in the future that we just don't have language for. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. Because you're living history. This is, step back and think about it for a second. This is awesome. This is an awesome time to be alive. In the time frame that I showed you from the mainframe, right? Think about this, because many of your parents and grandparents actually lived this. You went from phones that had to be physically connected to a line, right? And I couldn't find a good picture of a rotary phone, but there actually used to be these things where you had to turn the dial, right? Touch tone phones. That was a big thing. That's a black and white TV. Then all of a sudden there was color TV. And then there were rockets that went to space and went to the moon. Jet travel. It used to take like a week to fly someplace. And all of a sudden there were jets and you could fly coast to coast in 8 hours. Not to mention international travel, right? And you had a space shuttle that actually went up to space and landed and came back down. And you had mobile phones, cell phones. And they started off as these very clunky things, and all of a sudden they got very sleek, right? And you go back to that black and white TV that had tubes in it, and now you have flat screen TVs and smartphones. So when I reflect on this and I think about like my mother, my parents, and what they lived through, the amount of change that they saw over a fairly compressed amount of time is actually really significant. Some people are freaking out because we've actually been a little bit stagnant for a period of time because it's taken from 1956 to November of 2023 when ChatGPT dropped for us to catch up on all of these incremental changes to now go into an explosive cycle of change. And it's a really, really fun time to be alive because every day you're going to wake up and you go, oh, wow, that's amazing. And I would encourage you not to get concerned, not to get freaked out, not to get anxious, and instead just be thankful that you live in a time of such incredible innovation. Because we are about to experience history in the next 5 to 7 years. A lot of things are going to change a lot of quickly. But if you take a look at it in the historical context, it doesn't seem so big. It's actually just the next logical progression if you understand the arc of where we came from to where we are today. But AI presents really, really unrealistic positive expectations. There's a lot of people out there that think AI is going to solve a bunch of problems that it can't possibly solve today because it has fundamental underlying issues. Most AI systems, in fact, unless it's a model that's specifically geared towards mathematics, can't do basic math. That's kind of an Achilles heel, right? There's also unrealistic fears that everybody's going to lose their jobs, AI is going to blow up the world. Neither of these two things are going to happen. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. And the way that you can always understand that better is to go back to history. There's a website, which the name of it is evading me right now, but it is actually a website that chronicles the historical adoption of technology and all of the predictions and bad things that people said were going to happen. The majority of which never happened, right? And some of it, is as simple as, the radio, TV, the telephone. A lot of people thought the telephone was going to be the end of society. Change is the only constant in life. You get comfortable with it. You're well positioned with your skill set to have every success possible if you do three things. One, remember history, look backwards. People who study political science is essentially the study of history, right? And making predictions about the future. Two, try to get an internship and experiment with what it is that you like, right? There may be things that you look at on paper that you say, I would never do that. I would never do that job. But when you actually experience what the job is actually is, you might really enjoy. And the same thing is true vice versa. You might think cybersecurity is the most fascinating thing in the entire world. And then you might be through your first security incident. And you might say, this is not for me. My mother got her degree in radiography from the University of New York. Until she went in to give her first x-ray, she did not realize how much she did not like the sight of blood. She immediately fainted, graduated with her degree, and never actually practiced. You don't know that until you experience it. So go out and try it. The third thing I would say, the third small piece of advice I would give you, try to find a mentor. Try to find somebody who can help you navigate through these times of change and provide perspective. Your alternative is actually to do the legwork and actually go back and read the history and understand the context, because that's what will actually provide you comfort. It will let you know that this is an amazing time to be alive, and it will provide you with direction for what you should do in the future. So with that, just remember, specifically from a security standpoint, there is no solving the security problem. It's not solved. It's not over. It's never over. It's a risk that you manage. So with that, thank you again very much.
Thank you so much for your outstanding presentation. It was really awesome. He really pulled us back in time, those mainframe era in the 70s. Of course, I said it will start back then in 1945. The ENIAC, if you go to the University of Pennsylvania, they have the first computer. and it looks like the hard drive is the size of this house. And it's like 3,000-4,000 people could lift the hard drive. That was in 1945. So like in 80 years, we have been really transitioned a lot, and that's really amazing. So it's really interesting. He just took us from 1975 all the way to the AI world. So speaking of the historical and facts, back then when computers 95, Windows 95 first started, that era, somebody called my friend. My friend started a job as a technical support specialist at a company, and one of the customers called and said, I need antivirus software. And he said, why you need that antivirus software? I need it. You have to bring it back home. I said, no, we cannot bring antivirus software to home. If you are an employee, I have to install it here. And there was a lot of argument. And finally, that person said, no, I need that antivirus software because my son, he got a flu. So I need that. He thought it was like an antivirus, real virus remediation tool. So his son got a flu, and he requested for a software antivirus. So it was that naive back then. So we transformed it a lot, and we are here now in the age of AI and ML. So I really like what he mentioned about the AI risk. The biggest risk with AI is that nobody's taking responsibility for AI. If you have Microsoft Office, if there is an issue, you will call Microsoft. If you have a Cisco or Juniper switch, you will contact the vendor. For AI, just simply pull it from GitHub. Nobody is responsible, whether there is virus, there is adversarial machine learning on it, there is nobody accountable for. So that's one point which you need to ponder. Who is responsible for this AI ML models? Still no one, as far as I know. So that's a bigger concern. But he really had a good handshake at the end regarding risk. He said there is no way to eliminate risk. Either you have to accept it or manage it. You have to reduce it to an acceptable level, but there is no way to get rid of risk. So that's a good takeaway. And then I also like the mentor thing. That's really a good advice. It's always good to have a mentor. That way you can jump into a job in a little reasonable time as opposed to spending unnecessary time on it. So I would like you to ponder on that as well. That being said, again, on the behalf of the GPI and then BAU, I would like to thank our guest for traveling all the way to share his experience in an hour, which would be like a course by itself. We are really thankful. Thanks so much. That being said, Greg, you have something to say?
So you guys can ask questions. I remember I told you in my course, if you're in my course, you need to ask questions to the presenter here. He is sitting right here now, so start asking questions.
Good afternoon or good evening. My name is George. I'm in the cybersecurity law. My concern is about the laws on cross borders. We know we have cross border issues. So in our lectures, we have learned about cybercrime, the method for investigating. However, in my country, where I'm coming from, I want to relate my country to this United States. In Sierra Leone, there are major challenges due to limited resources, outdated laws, and lack of technical expertise. So cybercrimes are often hard to investigate due to secrecy and privacy and cross-border issues. So my question is, what steps can a country like mine, Sierra Leone, take to build international cooperation in cybersecurity investigation, especially when resources are limited? Number two question is, how can small country like mine, or countries like Sierra Leone, implement and enforce online judications laws when many cyber-related offenses are committed by people outside nations' borders?
So thank you for your question. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay online. That's okay. The mic is there. So this is something that is actually a little bit difficult to navigate. I have had the unfortunate pleasure of dealing with federal and international law enforcement due to cybercrime in the past. And one of the things I think we need to keep in mind is that the bad actors are actually in the jurisdictions they are because of the lax enforcement, right? If you were asking me, if you were paying me a lot of money and you were asking me, how could I be a really effective cyber criminal? You have 25 years of protecting against cyber crime. How do I be a really effective cyber criminal? The first thing I would tell you is never do it from the United States. Never do it from a country that has strong laws that actually punish you for that behavior. And unfortunately, that's exactly what the bad guys have done. Now, that having been said, one of the beauties of the current era that we live in is that you have the ability to talk to other people online around the world and leverage their skill sets. So the best way to mitigate the lack of resources, and don't get me wrong, everybody has constraints. I had budgets of millions upon millions of dollars, and I still had constraints. I did not have enough people and resources and technology.
Yeah.
It is, however, a very large online community that can help, and open source tools that will mitigate resources. And if you can put those two things together, you can actually mitigate the constraints that you have. And there's also the potential of innovating. Whenever there's a constraint in technology, that provides the opportunity to innovate. And we actually see that, to bring it back just real briefly to the whole AI thing. We actually see that. That's what DeepSeek should tell us, thinking about it critically. Why was DeepSeek able to do something that the large labs in the United States and France were not able to do, right? Train a model for a very low cost. Well, that's because the United States put sanctions on China, and DeepSeek had an artificial constraint that they needed to solve. So they solved that technology problem in an innovative way, and they leapfrog things. So don't always think of that as a negative. I would actually flip that on its head and suggest that's actually a positive, and use that constraint to your advantage.
To add on what Tracy said, for a country like Sierra Leone, or that matter to any country who doesn't have a policy, the best thing would be create a national policy on forensics. There has to be a policy at the national level. It's like a law. You have to pass a law. It's just you have to draft a document. There is a lot of documents. If you want one, I can share one with you. So that's a starting point. That could be you. I mean, you can, after you graduate, you can start that initiative and create that. You can fill the gap, recreating the first, or at least recommending the first national forensic policy or law in Sierra Leone. Thank you.
May I? Sorry to intrude here as a total ignorant person. A couple of things. First of all, thank you. This is a great presentation. One thing, sort of technical, but it has to do with public policy, really. Everybody knows, and I'm sure you all people know better than most, that the power AI data centers one needs an enormous amount of electricity, which we don't have. And we read in the news about the big players saying, setting up deals. Microsoft were reactivating, 3 Mile Island because we're going to be tons and tons and tons more of electricity, which we don't have. And I don't think it's possible, quite frankly, and I don't think AI can help with this. I know to solve its own problem, because either you have the electricity or you don't. DeepSeek, we understand, consumes much, much less energy. You talk about the Chinese having successfully worked around this. So which is which? If the Chinese can produce a very effective AI tool that consumes a modicum of electricity, is our own modeling that says, oh, we need a ton more. We need to increase that. We're talking increasing electricity production by 300, 400, 500% in the United States, which is already the largest producer and consumer electricity per capita in the world. Which is which? So that's an interesting question, because if those constraints are real, that means the development of AI is constrained by the lack of electricity, or not, if the Chinese model is better. The second question, which I'm sure you asked all the time, and again, from somebody interested in public policy like me, is the ability of AI to produce false information in a way that is completely unrecognizable for the layperson from the real deal. So people think about a nightmarish world in which we, the common folks who don't know much about anything, are bombarded with false information and have no idea which is which. We will now be able to discern truth from falsehood because the false stuff looks so good, so perfect, that fools me and everybody else. Is that kind of a science fiction fear, that one of those things that you said being predicted never happened, or is that a real concern? Thank you so much.
No problem. So thank you for the questions. I take a second here and try to contextualize this. So I once heard a talk, it was probably right before COVID, from a very, very well-known futurist, and he was paid a lot of money, probably like $50,000. Come in and give us a talk for 1 hour and tell us what the future was going to look like. And he started off that presentation by talking about the old mills in Maine. In Maine, there were mills that processed wood and made paper. They processed various things and made fabrics and shoes. And all of them were located on major rivers because those factories required a ton of electricity. So they all had to have their own power plants. And his corollary was that technology is going to follow that same path. Nobody has their own power plant now. They get their power distributed to them from a centralized place or utility that produces the power. Now, I think there were two ways that we can look at this. One, AI is actually such a utility technology that we are going back to the previous industrial age where everybody needs to produce their own power. Or two, it's an immediate constraint, but we'll figure it out in the near term. And I think that the second one is probably actually closer to the truth. Yes, I can tell you, I will tell you that in this area, in the DC area, I happen to know because I used to spend a lot of time in the data centers south of here that run 90% of the internet. There's actually a lot of power down here, but the grid here is becoming saturated. In New England, we've been saturated for more than a decade. We don't have enough power. So there's a fundamental need to build more power capacity in the network anyway. But from an AI perspective and what it's consuming, I think that we'll figure that out. And the initial estimates will not be as much as what we're actually going to build. That's kind of one thing. The other thing is that given that constraint creates an opportunity. What are those? Anybody who's actually ever been in a server room, server rooms require a lot of cooling. Why? Because the systems create a lot of heat. Logically, somebody is going to figure out how to take that heat, transfer it back into a power generating capability. I could tell you I've actually seen this in one of the most advanced data centers in the world in Amsterdam. It's located right beside the University of Amsterdam. All of the heat that it produces actually goes into underground wells that are used to heat the university during the winter, and during the summer, they suck in cold water and cool the data center. So we're already doing it just in a very, very small way. But I would guess that there's probably the capability, or somebody's going to figure out how to actually regenerate power from all of the heat that is created from all of the AI, which will reduce that load. So that's one thing. Kind of the first question. Second question. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the website, but there were very similar concerns when the printing press was first invented, right? That is a broader societal concern. I remember the early days of the internet, and people always used to say a few things. Don't believe everything you meet on the internet or you read on the internet. Don't meet strangers from the internet, and never get in a car with somebody you don't know. Now, we do all three things when we get an Uber. We've put a fundamental amount of trust in that information environment. And now that information environment is changing. I will tell you, because I forgot, I mentioned that I was gonna say something. I put it out there as a teaser, and then I forgot to say it. The history slides were created using an AI system called Manus, which is relatively new. I told Manus that I was giving this presentation, gave it the framework of the presentation, and Manus created the timeline. Now I looked at the timeline and I saw something kind of funny. I was like, oh, well, HIPAA is in the 2000s. I happen to know because I was around at the time that HIPAA was actually passed in the 1990s. So I went and looked it up. Technically, pedantically, Manus was correct because the data security rule for HIPAA wasn't passed until 2005. The original law was passed in 1996. It went into effect in 1999. Data security requirement in 2005. I think from a broader societal standpoint, yes, there is always room for these systems to, they say, hallucinate. I would argue that that's not the right term. The proper term would be a confabulation. It's a confusion. People do the same thing. When you talk to somebody, you don't necessarily get everything right. Your recollection isn't always correct. And we need to start to build that into our information environment and checking things. There are websites that have been around for 20 plus years. Snopes is a great example, right? How did that come to be? Well, people took things from the old days when people actually used to write on a piece of paper and mail it, right? Chain letters and other things that said, I know something that happened. This kid got his braces stuck in the bottom of a pool and drowned. Well, that's not true. All of that just came out of society as it already existed and got transferred online. And now all of that is already in the corpus of data that these AI models were trained on, and now it exists there too, right? There was a great podcast that I heard regarding this, where at one point in time, if you ask an AI model, I'm having trouble with the power of my motorcycle engine, what's the best way to fix it? And it would respond, try 1 cup of sugar in the gas tank. And that's because the data it was trained on was from a message board that had a sarcastic response, which was, pour sugar in your gas tank. So this is the kind of the problem with AI, right? AI can't understand the subtlety of sarcasm. It doesn't have that capability. So it's incumbent on us to think critically. Again, one of the key takeaways, think critically about the information that you're being presented and see whether or not it actually makes sense, right? So that's kind of, probably a little bit more long-winded than I wanted to start off with, but the essential idea is this is the same exact problem we had in the late 90s, early 2000s when the internet really took off and everybody said, I saw this thing on the internet. And what was the first thing everybody said? You guys probably can't remember because you weren't online at that time. But what everybody said was, you can't believe everything you read on the internet. Well, same thing all over again. You can't believe everything AI says. And there are actual technical reasons for that. But more broadly, the reason why you can't necessarily trust everything is because it's trained on the data from us and we are inherently fallible. Hopefully that answers your question.
Online? Okay, let me give it up to you, Amy.
Okay, so the first question is, what major advantages does AI bring to the security sector compared to traditional automation? And the person is also asking how AI is currently being used to enhance cybersecurity.
So speed. We my last place we had a world-class program. We could go from alert, meaning something bad happening on a system, to event, something bad happening on a system, to notification in 7 minutes, and that was considered world class. What AI gives us is the capability to do that in hopefully less than 30 seconds, because it will be able to have all the knowledge of a human analyst and of an automation, and to do that in a very compressed time period. As I mentioned, just mentioned, Manus created those timeline slides. It went out, did web searches, history, multiple files, created slides, and it took 5 minutes. Now, I know all of the information. If I were to write it from scratch, it would have taken me at least 5 hours. So you're talking about 10xing the capability of not only the individual in the seat from a cybersecurity perspective, but also from the team. So now one person can act like 10. So that's the answer to the first question. What was the second question? Sorry. How AI is currently being used to enhance cybersecurity efforts. So there's a lot of really, really interesting things being done in that space. There is the concept of continuous security posture monitoring and management. So traditionally what you would do is you would put your defenses in place, whether that be a firewall, antivirus, something else. And now with an AI system, you can actually test that. So you can have an AI try to proactively, ethically hack you and penetrate your defenses. And you could do that every second, you could do that every minute, you can do that every hour, you could do that every day, every month, whatever, however you want to do it. That is a significant difference in capability, and probably one of the best AI use cases that I've seen that actually works. Again, thinking critically, there's a lot of people out there that are trying to sell AI agents for cybersecurity that aren't actually AI agents. They are AI, they're automations with a little sprinkling of AI. But realistically, we don't have enough people in cybersecurity. The cognitive load of cybersecurity, trying to remember everything in, out, left, right, and all the different technologies, is actually relatively difficult. So anything that a cybersecurity professional can do to offload some of that cognitive load so that they can think critically about whether or not the behavior that's happening is legitimate or not is actually a huge help and force magnifier.
The person also wants to know if there are very real risks with open source solutions.
If there's very real risks with open source solutions, yes and no. So this has been the conundrum with open source since the kind of the open source movement was initiated. One of the main advantages of open source is that it's open and everybody can see it. So if you're trying to do something malicious, other people in the community will detect that and they'll stop it. On the other hand, the volume of open source is starting to become an issue. As an example, if you're familiar in the AI space with a platform called Hugging Face, which is big in the AI community, allows you to download new models, test new models. Hey, Professor Z actually just mentioned it. There's 1 million models on Hugging Face. They're all open source. There's no good way right now to detect whether or not something has been maliciously inserted into those models, or with that when you download the dependencies for that model, whether or not there's something malicious in that. So with most things in life, it's a double-edged sword. That having been said, as a general principle in cybersecurity, obscurity is not security. And that's why, again, I pitch heavily the National Cryptology Museum, because in cryptology, the only thing that is secret in a cryptographic system is the key. That's it. Everything else, everybody can see. And that's actually one of the fundamental precepts of security. Is that it's not security if you have to hide it and obfuscate it.
I have a question. Yeah, there's a few questions over there and then back over there.
So my first question would be that, as you mentioned, it, as compared to the past, the cybersecurity threats have become much more sophisticated. So, what do you think? How can an organization, in the face of such sophisticated cybersecurity threats, manage to strike a balance between implementing proactive threat detection models while maintaining operational efficiency, especially when they have to implement advanced security measures within the company, such as zero trust architecture and AI-driven threat insurance. And my second question is just something that would be your perspective on the topic. So, as you mentioned that AI does not have like the potential to understand sentiments like sarcasm or something like that. But you also mentioned that it does work on the information coming from human beings. Do you think that in the future we might have AI systems that are intelligent enough to actually understand sentiment and do that as well?
Yeah, so let me take that. I'll take that in reverse order. Yeah, so there are already systems that can do sentiment analysis. The challenge that the AI system has is that essentially it's not embodied, right? So sitting in this room or watching us online, if you read the transcript does not take into account the intonation of my voice, my body posture. In fact, 70% of human communication is nonverbal. That's the gap for AI. That's why it can't understand sarcasm, because it can't see the way that I subtly move my hands, my face, and understand the intonation of my voice, right? There are already systems out there that can do sentiment analysis, and there's actually AI therapists and AI friends and buddies, girlfriends, boyfriends that already exist. So that's the second question. The first question, the simple answer is you need to understand what your tolerance is for that risk, and then a fundamental precept that is often overlooked of zero trust is actually microsegmentation. You make things small enough so that if that one thing is destroyed, the rest of the organization can function and continue. And that's really the only path forward. Unfortunately, a lot of the risks that we see from a cyber standpoint are legacy, and they need to be moved off into their own area as you take in a more advanced approach such as zero trust.
Thank you very much. So two quick questions. So, sorry, two quick questions. I mean, your experience, see that you have experience in massive team, which is good. And in your experience at the at biggest, and if there are those acting as compared to specific antivirus specific. I know that most of the time companies do that just to kind of understand. So if they are they more effective as they sales? Then my second question. So what's the advice for let's say software developers who, for instance, how to build software say features of softwares that they have to kind of put into them screening features that are robust and have to correct properly at all.
Right. So taking the first thing first regarding antivirus. I happen to ascribe to a very old school concept called defense in depth. So if we take the example of ransomware that I went through, something is downloaded, something is executed, a call is made out to command and control. That's not antivirus. That's not one system. It's actually three different systems. 95% of all bad things come into your environment through email. So you need to have a very good email gateway and spam filtering capability. If something does get through there, you need to have a very strong antivirus system. And if something does get through that antivirus system, then you need a very robust web proxy, web gateway that will prevent the handshake from command and control to do the encryption. This is specific to the use case of ransomware, but it's the same as most other problems in cybersecurity. The general concept is that no one failure in a cybersecurity ecosystem should constitute the failure of the entire ecosystem. And that's why you layer multiple different technologies to take care of different use cases. So that's one. Two, for your secure development question regarding more advanced features. There are well understood frameworks and practices regarding security testing, and that can be static analysis of your code, dynamic analysis of your web front end, and the best thing is to put those two things together to test your code to make it more bulletproof. There are always going to be things in code that are going to be abused for unintended reasons. What AI is facilitating is finding those misuse cases faster. And there are actually AI frameworks out there that will do that red teaming for you. So that's what I would suggest.
Hi. My question is very simple and it's about how we can create and effectively engage and raise people awareness in a company when we're talking about cybersecurity risks because they're not tangible. I'm coming from a background where we are like implementing occupational and safety risk guidelines, and even when their life is in risk, it's very hard to create awareness to the personnel and they can die. But when we're talking about cyber threats, they cannot see like an immediately effect that have a repercussion on their life. And I know we're always talking about enforce quality and measure all the objectives, but how can we ensure that the policies and the guidelines and all the strategies that we are creating from all the quality and assurance and risk management are effective? Because it's important to have all the technology, but sometimes the first layer of security is involving our employees.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. So if some of you have studied enough of computer science, you will know that there's this thing called the OSI model. The OSI model is a 7-layer model going all the way from the hardware layer all the way up to the application layer. But one of the things that's not typically taught in schools is that there's another layer. It's layer 8. That's the wetware, people. People are fundamentally probably the hardest thing to manage in cybersecurity, right? And that's not managing from an employee standpoint, that's actually education and behavioral change. Here's the best recommendation I can give you in a nutshell, and it's not something that a lot of folks talk about. You need to personalize it for them. If you remember to listen to, and this I'm dating myself again, the radio station, WIFM, what's in it for me? Make it about what's in it for them, and you will have a much better chance of changing that behavior. I have built out a couple of security programs. I call it people-centric security. And the way that I brand that is typically secure at home and at work. At home starts first because that's what's most dear to me. It's my information, it's my children's information, it's my family information. I want to protect that. If you can frame it in such a way that you are giving them something that will benefit them in their daily life and take care of the people that they care about the most, they will use those same behaviors at work. And that's the hack. It's not about you have to do this to protect the company. It's about you should do this because it protects you and your family. Right? That's what will drive the behavioral change.
I would like to already mention how AI is a fast evolving and growing trend. So do you think in the near future AI could be capable of independent thought and maybe act beyond its programming?
So that's an interesting question. Again, at the end there, I summarized things as saying that there's a lot of pessimism in the AI community. There's this thing called PDOOM, which again, you have to remember the AI folks are all mathematicians. So in math, there can never be a probability of zero, right? So that's kind of where that comes from. And I've listened to a lot of these folks. There's actually an interesting podcast that's actually called Doom Debates, where they bring on people who are, machine learning specialists and AI professionals, and they discuss all the bad things that could possibly happen. One, I don't think we know. I'm not sure that we might ever know. There was a research paper that came out just this past week that essentially showed that what everybody thought chain of thought was actually doing was actually the AI explaining to us how it came to the conclusion that it came to. That actually observably is not actually true. Observably, what is actually true is that the AI already knows the answer because it's been trained on the corpus of all knowledge that we currently have as humans, right? It goes to the answer, and then to explain to us, because we're punny little humans, it backs into that explanation. So can it think? Can it reason? I will say this with a fairly high degree of certainty. AI will continue to progress, and we will see a next step beyond the transformer architecture. And in that new architecture, the question that you're asking could actually be of concern. The transformer architecture and backpropagation in general has some significant technical limitations in the way that it actually works and functions. To be able to reason and think in the way that we understand that as humans. There's another iteration, I believe, that needs to happen before that actually becomes a risk.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Recently, I've seen the ChatGPT-4 system. Whenever you give it a new prompt, it tells you that system is updating. That means whenever you give it something that is new, it's updated into the algorithm. So we also have to look about the ethical use of those things and how the national security should go about it. So my question here is, how can national security policy ensure AI systems are developed and used ethically and securely? Two, should AI developers be held legally accountable for harms by AI power system and attack?
So legally responsible, I don't think that is possible or feasible. And I say that coming from a historical perspective, because the most difficult thing that you can do in cybersecurity is attribution. Right? I can tell you who I think attacked me, but there are ways that I can also technically spoof that. So I can, if you're thinking about that from an AI standpoint, I could make you think that Greg punched you in the face when I actually did it. Which is part of the reason why we have, and I'm not going to editorialize on it, but we have a law in the United States called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which actually prevents private organizations from attacking back. And if fundamentally we want to change anything from either an AI or cyber standpoint, that would be probably one of the key changes would be to allow people to hack back. But again, because you can't tell through your analysis whether or not it was Greg or I who hit you, maybe you walk up and punch me in the face and I never did anything to you. Right? I would say that there's a corollary there with from a national security standpoint, state secrets and other things. Right? Half of the cryptological museum is actually about breaking codes and ciphers and intercepting and stealing those state secrets, whether that be the Enigma machine that was used by Germany or Russian or even American. cryptography and secrets. That is an intractable problem that if you go there, you will see something that's referred to as the Caesar cipher. It's a problem that we haven't solved in 2,000 years. And I don't think even with the help of AI, we're going to be able to solve that in the next 2,000. And it's partially part of the human condition. The alternative is to not have secrets.
Due to time constraint, there are some three questions. One online, so let us give two chances and then we'll wrap up the session.
Yep.
Two from you, and then there's another two, and then one online session.
Good evening. First of all, thank you for your talk. It was extremely valuable. I will be using what you share about policy management in the future. My first question, it goes about how are you seeing AI and machine learning change both offensive and defensive cybersecurity strategies nowadays? And the second one is about your perception. What skills gap do you see most prominently in today's cybersecurity workforce?
Great question. Biggest skill gap, I take them in reverse order. The biggest skill gap in today's cybersecurity workforce, from my perspective, and I've already been very transparent about this, is critical thinking. Again, I've had a lot of college students, interns. I've, brought them up through my program. And one of the things that I focus on with them is history, because I explain to them the history of how something happened so that they can reason about something that they've never seen before and have context to be able to determine whether or not they're seeing that same thing again. And critical thinking. I could teach you all the technology. The technology is the easy part. What I cannot do is teach you how to think and think critically. Those are the two magic things. That's it. The technology is the easiest portion. And to be honest with you, that is probably the biggest skill gap that exists. Because most students come out of college and they think that they are going to be working a lot with a particular technology. Technology changes, even big systems. In my last company, I was there for 8.5 years, and we replaced our security information management system, literally the heart and liver of the entire security ecosystem. In 8.5 years, we changed it 3 times because we continued to grow and we would outgrow what we had, right? So the technology is going to change. Change is the only constant. In order to deal with that change, you need to have some curiosity and be able to think critically. So that's number one. Number two, what's changing from a AI cybersecurity standpoint? I'll be honest with you. I talk to a lot of CISOs. I've been trying to do my own startup. Security folks don't have time to think about AI right now. We're too busy fighting everyday fires in ransomware. And there's a tsunami coming that is going to hit us fairly good. I can tell you from a bad guy perspective, if you go on the dark web, there is, within 6 months of there being ChatGPT, there was an evil GPT, there was a fraud GPT, there was a malware GPT. So all the bad guys are using that as well. But the bad guys are caught in the same innovator's dilemma as the cybersecurity people. You still have to, rip people off and make money today. So you don't necessarily have all the time that you would like to be able to learn the new latest technology. So there's something building. It will happen over time. But realistically, again, if you understand the history, the cybersecurity response will be retroactive or reactive, not proactive. Right? That's what history tells us. The technology is invented, something bad happens, we do something to mitigate it. That's probably what we're looking at. I would be pleasantly surprised if that wasn't the case this time, but that's probably where we're going to end up.
Professor, so hearing about your career timeline, I was wondering that if you'd like to share any incident that you had to prevent as in a cybersecurity threat. Like you mentioned that Stuxnet is it was one of the biggest incident. And did you have to prevent any incident, and what was your incident response?
And my second question would be, given the war situation, how US is dealing with it, cybersecurity of US government must be facing or dealing with the cybersecurity protection. So how do you see that within the next year, what could be the biggest emerging cybersecurity threat in your eyes or in your as per your expertise?
So thank you. So yeah, a lot of experience with incident response. I will tell you this. One of the things that I certainly hope you never get to experience is a call at 5 o'clock from the FBI telling you that they want to call back at 5:30 with you sitting in the office with your boss on your personal cell phone without you ever having provided that cell phone number to the best of your knowledge to the FBI. It all sounds kind of very glamorous, but in reality, you get used to it, but it's not actually really that fun. Another example that I can share with you was an email sent to a customer service representative purporting to be from a very well-known ransomware group, asking for a ransom paid in Bitcoin before a certain date. Otherwise, the organization would be ransomed. Now, having an FBI agent's number in your phone becomes very helpful in that particular circumstance, because you can call them and say, hey, I got this extortion message. And if I don't do something in the next 24 hours, they're saying something bad is going to happen. Is this true? And thankfully, the response came back, no, it's not true. It's fake. You know, the people saying that they're this group are not this group. It is something that you really have to be in to appreciate, I think. It's an interesting life, but people would always say to me, oh, you do cybersecurity, that must be so exciting. My response is always, I work very hard not to have exciting days. If you see me running around having an exciting day, something bad is typically. So that's kind of the answer to the first question. There's just so much there. And I was outside of a brief period of time at an organization that was critical infrastructure and regulated by the federal government. I haven't had to deal with a ton of that. And I still know people at Homeland Security, FBI, and other places, right? So I can't even imagine what it's like from a critical infrastructure kind of federal government perspective, because they are seeing an onslaught of attacks on a daily basis. One of the key things that I think we need to step back though and think about regarding that, if you go back to your networking fundamentals, you have IP ranges and classes, A, B, C. A lot of people never get told about the other two, D and E. And those are completely separate for military and other uses. So I would certainly hope that they're sitting on that kind of non-internet routable space and they are having a much better time of it. But I would also probably expect that my, punny, billion bad things is probably maybe a per second thing for them and not a per day type of thing. So. One more online.
I think we are good. Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and patience. Flip side, would like to appreciate Percy for his time and valuable insight for sharing his plethora of knowledge in less than 2 hours. We'll continue having related discussions in the future so that you will get this on the side knowledge as well. That's crucial. We really appreciate. Don't forget to sign over there. Thank you so much and have a blessed day. Thank you. It's, want to take a big picture? Yeah, no problem.